Wembley Stadium. This temple of sport, with its twin towers, will be familiar to most. If only from television, most of us will recognise the great sweep of the seating, the manicured green turf of the pitch, with the dog track round it, and at one end, the famous tunnel from which the players emerged to the brilliance and space of the arena and the roar of the crowds. Wembley's surely the best-known football stadium in the whole UK. For 3/4 of a century, it's hosted some of the greatest football matches, cup finals, World Cup matches, and so on. They even call it the venue of legends. But just what does that title mean? What makes a legend? In football, I suppose it depends on who's playing and whether it's a hard-fought game or not. This looks like an easy goal.
And here comes Hurst. He's got some people on the pitch. They think it's all over. It is now. It's goal.
That goal, in the closing seconds of a World Cup final, certainly has legendary status. Some matches are memorable in themselves. But it was the policeman on the white horse who made Wembley's first football match famous. And Wembley has been host to other legendary events. From dog racing and Mick the Miller, to rugby league, from Olympic Games, to gymnastic displays, from religious ceremonies, to rock concerts. Wembley has seen them all. We need to ask why this building suits the sorts of events that create legends. Why did the events come here in the first place? And then, what effect have those legends had on this building? The stadium's a familiar landmark, and the Twin Towers have come to symbolise England's premier sporting venue. Yet Wembley has recently been described as uncomfortable, unsuitable, and outdated. It's quite surprising that with all its faults, the building still commands affection and still has legendary status itself. One factor that overrides many of the discomforts is the power of tradition. Wembley Stadium has a history. When it was first built in 1922-3, it was intended to be the latest thing in stadium design. The most modern materials, steel and ferroconcrete, were used, allowing the stadium to be erected in a mere 300 days. Designed to accommodate over 120,000 spectators, it's held up by a network of surprisingly light steel girders. These support reinforced concrete beams and concrete terraces. The architects claimed it was the largest monumental reinforced concrete structure in the world. This was the cutting edge of engineering in the 1920s. The designers called for elaborate tests to ensure that the structure would perform effectively. An army of 1,200 men sat and swayed and stamped in unison for an hour to see if there were any signs of structural weakness. There weren't, and the stadium was ready just in time for the Bolton-West Ham Cup final of 1923. This was the legendary White Horse Cup final. It was a bold move by the FA to commit the cup final to an untried ground and to sign a 21-year contract. But Wembley offered first-class facilities. There were proper terraces on all sides, with safety barriers, and covered seating for 20,000. There was good reason for the grandeur of the stadium. Not only was it to be a fine home for a popular sport, and an advance on some of the less glamorous club grounds, but the stadium was also to be a central feature of the British Empire Exhibition of 1924, an exhibition that spread over a 216-acre site to the north of the stadium. Britain was setting out to display its wares, and through them its power, on this new site. First thought of in 1913, plans for a British Empire exhibition were launched in 1919, when it was felt that out of the ashes of the First World War would rise a new Commonwealth of Nations with a new faith in the future. The exhibition was intended to further this ideal, and it affords a glimpse of the cultural temperature of Britain at the time. To understand why the stadium was built the way it was, we need to understand the exhibition it was part of. Everything at Wembley should be the newest, the biggest, and of course the best, including the stadium. So it's no surprise to find the stadium's foundation stone was laid by the Duke of York, and the exhibition opened by the King at a ceremony in the stadium. This involvement of royalty set the building firmly within the structure of British society, and British history was celebrated in the opening events. In fact, the events in the stadium focused on imperial history and power, reflecting Edwardian and Victorian imperial values, and the assumption that Britain was the dominant mother country. This imperial hierarchy is also reflected in the various shapes of the buildings. The British Government Pavilion was a solid-looking structure with a centrepiece like a Greek temple, a row of imperial British lions crouched along the terrace. Inside, the grey walls of the Court of Honour were hung with the royal coat of arms, the arms of the dominions and protectorates and the provinces of India, while at the visitors' feet a vast relief map displayed the geographical extent of empire. The official guide even contained a map of the empire, with all the pink bits on which the sun never set. The British Empire exhibition was a display of the political and economic power of the empire, and a celebration of its history and permanence. The Government Pavilion was reached by a reconstruction of Old London Bridge, while all around were separate pavilions for each of the nations of the empire. Significantly, the more westernised countries opted for traditional classical forms, with pillars and pediments, like the Government Pavilion. The Indian Pavilion, a sort of distant cousin of the Taj Mahal, reflected India's importance to the empire by its size and splendour. Other countries, such as Hong Kong and Burma, built structures reflecting their different ethnic architectures. Each nation displayed the produce it considered most typical. A huge gold ball represented South African mineral wealth. Australia's wool was similarly shown by a trophy that measured 16 feet in diameter. Perhaps the most extraordinary of these displays was a life-size statue of the Prince of Wales, sculpted in Canadian butter. A curiosity, certainly, but also a demonstration of modern science in its massive refrigerated case that kept it fresh all through the summer of 1924. Curiosity aside, the exhibition was very much a trade fair. British trade and manufactures were displayed in two vast palaces of industry and engineering, which contained examples of the sort of heavy engineering that had allowed the British Empire to survive. But there was a stress on progress in the section devoted to transport. The 1920s was the beginning of the era of the mass-produced car, when personal transport was just beginning to be widespread. This display was effectively the start of the motor show, a trade fair that flourishes still. The British Empire exhibition was enormously popular, attracting 17.5 million visitors.
It is a family party to which every part of the empire is invited, and at which every part of the empire is represented.
There was no mistaking who was head of the family, but there really was a good deal of party atmosphere. One part of the exhibition site was given over to a 47-acre amusement park, described as the greatest aggregation of amusements in the world, with the King and Queen even trying the scenic railway. But the exhibition was more than just a fair. The Wembley Guide went so far as to say,
"The British Empire is the greatest the world has ever seen. The British Empire exhibition is the most wonderful product of that empire."
This was the context that gave rise to the huge new stadium, an imperial centrepiece set on the crest of the hill.
There is not in all England a building that can compete with the Empire Stadium in the effect it creates in the mind of the spectator. In design, it is vast and imposing. In construction, it has the solid quality that appears to defy time. In point of size, it challenges comparison with anything of the kind in the world. The stadium covers more than 10 acres. Rome's immortal Colosseum would be lost within it. In a world that has developed so great a devotion to sport, there is no arena that can compare with Wembley's.
The stadium was designed to be much more than merely a football ground. The very shape echoes the Roman Colosseum. The comparison made in that quote is no accident. Probably built as a conscious reference to this imperial centrepiece, Wembley's round arches recall those of the Colosseum. And on the exterior facade are found traces of classical detailing. The use of this architectural style says much about how the original designers wanted this building to be read. And, like the Colosseum in its day, this stadium also was to be thoroughly modern, using the latest material. The ancient Colosseum was designed with massive, load-bearing walls. But Wembley Stadium is an early example of reinforced concrete construction, which allows the arches to be much wider and lighter than the builders of the Roman Colosseum could ever imagine. Wembley Stadium combines the different virtues of concrete and steel. Although it looks immensely solid from a distance, it's all light ferroconcrete construction. There's a frame with steel rods inside here which is set up first, and then a wooden mould or shuttering is put up and the wet concrete poured into it. You can actually see the marks made by the planks here. But when it's dry, the ribbed surface and the horizontal grooves help to conceal the joins between each day's casting and make it look like massive stonework. Actually, the wall's only about 2.5 inches thick, so a deeply recessed window like this one needs to be boxed out on the inside. This sort of false solidity might seem an odd way of going about things, but the point was to make the building look imposing. So I don't find it surprising that this was done by echoing a classical amphitheatre. This structure has most of the same functional constraints as the Colosseum, and so can make use of the same architectural shapes. Under the seats of the Colosseum, large vaulted arcades served as foyers. Wembley's extensive foyer area is also tucked into the space under the seating. Here, the ceiling mimics the Roman vaulting, but this space houses a large bar, originally the longest straight bar in the world, designed to supply the needs of reporters and others attending the events. And numbers of people and their needs were crucial in the design of this place. Wembley management quickly learned that it had to provide easy access for very large crowds. The first cup final wasn't even an all-ticket affair, and many of the 200,000 spectators simply climbed in. The Roman solution to crowds like these had been numbered entrances, leading through arcaded foyers, up a series of stairways, and so out through archways into the tiered seating. At Wembley, the outer arches are now fitted with turnstiles and lettered. Beside them rise staircase towers, each of which contains a pair of interlocking stairs that lead right to the top of the seating. At the lower level, a spacious foyer opens through numbered arches to the middle tiers. In this way, Wembley could accommodate more than twice as many as the Colosseum. And Wembley's games, like the Roman Ludi, were presided over by royalty, who passed through a more elegant private foyer to the reserved royal box. The fact that the King and Queen attended may have helped to swell the crowds. It certainly put an official seal of approval on the stadium and the activities there. The royal box, placed like the Roman emperors at the Colosseum on the short axis of the pitch, not only allows an excellent view of the game, it's also the place where, in full view of the crowds, the coveted cup can be presented. The link between the pleasure and passion of the sport and the formal institutions of the monarchy helps to form the way in which we react to Wembley Stadium.
England are the world champions.
Because the stadium was a part of the British Empire exhibition, this temple of sport acquired an immediate status in the minds of the public at large. The stadium has survived, but what of the other buildings? The hope was that they'd be a permanent and lasting monument to British imperial leadership. The exhibition guide claimed,
"It is as well to insist that here we have no ephemeral structure designed to endure for a season and to pass thereafter into desolation and decay. The material chiefly used at Wembley for construction is concrete with steel. No other foundation would serve the purpose of empire."
The exhibition buildings, however, didn't have a very long design life. They were little better than industrial sheds with smart facades, and those facades weren't really solid enough to survive without regular attention. The stadium has had just that, and we need to ask why this, of all the buildings, was able to command the affection and fulfill the needs of succeeding generations. The exhibition brought the stadium into being, but it was sport that gave it a future. When the British Empire exhibition closed, the stadium was bought for about a quarter of what it had cost to build, and few people believed it could be run at a profit. The purchaser, Arthur, later Sir Arthur Elvin, was one of the demolition contractors of the exhibition site, who'd even succeeded in selling off some of the smaller structures, including the concrete lions, for removal wholesale to other locations. What was important for the stadium was that he managed to get the remaining 19 years of the Football Association's contract transferred to him with the stadium. Thus, there was a use in place when his company began. Arthur Elvin also arranged for other events to be played here that would broaden the scope of his stadium. Wembley had been designed as a multi-purpose structure, and so could easily host events such as dog racing, still the most regular event at Wembley. The Rugby League Cup final was first played here in 1929. In this way, Arthur Elvin set out to establish a secure commercial basis for his company. He also provided the opportunity for other legends to be created. In 1932, Elvin added a vast covered swimming pool, now the Wembley Arena. This could be floored over for other events, and wasn't used as a pool during the war years. But the presence of this facility, together with the stadium, made Wembley an ideal location for the first post-war Olympics in 1948. In that post-war austerity, there was neither money nor materials to build a new stadium. Wembley hadn't been damaged in the war and already had the facilities to make it an Olympic venue. The 1948 Games were widely seen as a contrast to the previous Olympics that had been held in Berlin. The stadium there, completed in 1936, was deliberately designed to house those Olympics. Even more than at Wembley, there are echoes of the Roman Colosseum, providing a suitably imperial language. Here, the architecture was intended as a demonstration of the superiority of the Third Reich and the forward-looking nature of the Nazi state. And that modernity is shown in the simple, square-cut shapes that look so dramatic in Leni Riefenstahl's film of the Olympic Games that Hitler was so proud to host. But the association of the Olympiastadion with the Nazi Party has left it with an altogether ambiguous meaning for us today. The 1948 Olympics acquired a rather different meaning, something of a celebration of peace and liberation, sharing perhaps something of the original hopes of the British Empire exhibition for a new faith in the future. But the worldwide gathering of athletes and the events of an Olympic Games did require some modification of the stadium. A new and larger tunnel was made to accommodate the great parade of athletes. This is the famous tunnel which is still in use today. Originally, the players entered at the opposite end of the pitch through a narrow passage. On the other hand, it was relatively easy to convert the 1920s dog track to an athletics track. And it was on that track that Emil Zatopek won his gold medal in the 10,000 metres.
Up to the finish, and Zatopek wins in 29 minutes, 59.6 seconds. Yet another Olympic record achieved in truly heroic style.
Olympic successes are permanently recorded on the outside of the stadium. Fanny Blankers-Koen won no less than 3 gold medals. These are the sort of events that become legends. And of course, the fact that these were Olympic Games, again with royalty present, further enhanced the status of Wembley Stadium as a national temple of sport. One of the ways that legends are preserved is on film, and it was in 1948 that television first came to Wembley. The installation of cameras was one of the first modifications that brought Wembley into the electronic age. The ultra-modern stadium of 1924 needed continuous adaptation to stay abreast of technological improvements. Until 1963, most of the stadium had been unroofed. Then a cantilevered steel covering was set up to support the massive awning that's part of Wembley today. 10 years earlier, Wembley had at last acquired floodlighting. The new roof allowed that to be further improved with more lighting towers. Wembley was late getting this facility, but at last it was possible to hold evening fixtures. Wembley needed to keep pace with the developing demands of its main sport. And there were further improvements for crowd control and safety. The passion felt for sport has often led to pitch invasions.
One of them thinks it. And a great tackle, almost on the line.
But one fan is a different case from the thousands at that first White Horse Cup final. Miraculously, no one was hurt then, but huge crowds do bring a risk. In April 1989, the surge of a crowd into one stand of the Hillsborough Ground in Sheffield had a horrific outcome. As a result, British football grounds were modified to become all-seater. In fact, Wembley had already taken the decision to install seats, and its new Olympic gallery was was opened in May 1989. As facilities gradually improved, Wembley was able to attract a wider variety of events and to reach an audience even wider than the tens of thousands who came as worshippers of one particular sport or another. When Pope John Paul II came to Britain, Wembley was the setting for a papal mass.
With its massive cross beneath the twin towers of Wembley and the crowds stretched across the famous turf, this was by far the largest gathering the Pope has encountered so far.
Pilgrims of a different kind filled the stadium to raise funds to fight famine, and Live Aid was born.
Coming together.
But such events, legendary though they may be, don't sustain the venue. It's as the home of major football matches, the function for which it was first used, that Wembley has really acquired legendary status.
McNally outside, he's round the back. Clock! 1-0.
It's the passion aroused by matches such as these, the legendary events of this sporting mecca, that brings crowds from far and wide. London Underground's contribution to the pilgrimage is a rebuilding of the access from their station. This is part of a millennium scheme to improve the whole experience of Wembley. Fans arrive at the start of Olympic Way, at the far end of which the twin towers of the stadium still beckon like the gateway to a shrine. Indeed, this view has become deeply embedded in the minds of all who follow English football, as well as many others. The stadium is inseparable from its legends. But there's an inherent problem. The oval layout of the original stadium, with a single slope of seating, means that some spectators are a long way from the action. It's been calculated that more than half the spectators at Wembley are beyond the optimum viewing distance, and as many as 20% beyond the recommended maximum distance. This makes the stadium less than ideal for football, and there are many who want to demolish and build from scratch a new wonder stadium that will be the latest thing for the new millennium. This would make a fitting national stadium for English football. But what of its history? In this design for the new stadium, the twin towers are carefully preserved, though everything else is replaced. The most conspicuous element of the 1923 stadium has become the symbol of this place as a venue of legends, able to survive even the obsolescence of the building itself.